Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the room. We're just waiting for a few more minutes for everyone to enter in before we're going to kick off with our panel discussion. So make yourself comfortable, grab a hot drink, and we will just start in the next few minutes. And if you are just joining in right now, we are waiting for a couple of more minutes for everyone to arrive. We are expecting a few more people to join up. So, yeah, we will be starting very shortly. Great. We have quite a jam-packed program penciled in for the next hour, so I'm going to kick off. If you are joining in just right now, take a seat in the room and we will be starting now. So, welcome to the annual Careers in Literature event with the Royal Society of Literature in partnership with King's College London. Tonight, the focus is on the highlights and challenges of making a career in the world of literature. We have gathered a brilliant panel whose career span poetry, theatre, bookselling, creative writing, and literary agencies. We are very much forward looking to a wide ranging conversation about the many different paths a life in literature can take. I'm your co-host, Sara Kärpänen, the founder of Women of the Week, a feminist independent media based at Somerset House, and the arts program director at the Finnish Institute in the UK and Ireland. And I am very, very excited to have you all here. Please meet my co-host, Karelia Abednego. She's completing her master's in contemporary literature, culture, and theory at King's College London and has worked also as an independent publisher. A couple of housekeeping rules. We will be together here for about an hour, kicking off with 40 minutes of conversation, followed by a Q&A with questions from you, from the audience. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screens to share any questions that you might have. You can already start asking your questions in the chat. This event is being recorded and will be available on the Royal Society of Literature's YouTube channel at RS Literature afterwards. Now, without further ado, let me introduce you to our fantastic panelists. Professor Mojisola Adebayo is an award-winning theatre artist, author, and academic at the Queen Mary University of London. Mojisola has been creating internationally for over 30 years from Antarctica to Zimbabwe. Some of her acclaimed plays include 48 Minutes for Palestine, Windrush Generations, Family Tree, and Stars. Her latest play is called Resistors. Mojisola is the theatre of the oppressed practitioner, currently co-developing theatre to improve sickle cell care. Suresh Ariaratnam has worked in the creative industries for over 25 years. Formerly a literary and talent agent representing authors from Black and Asian communities, he now advises multidisciplinary artists Johnny Pitts and Jay Bernard. Suresh is a co-chair of Literary Works, a trustee of Trussell, a director of Norland College, and a member of the British Library Advisory Council. He was made an honorary fellow of the Royal Society of Literature in 2022. Nick Bottomley is a co-founder of Mr. B's Emporium of Reading Delights, an independent bookshop in Bath, which has twice been named Independent Bookshop of the Year and is known for bookselling innovations such as the Reading Spa, one of the UK's largest bespoke reading subscription programs. Rose Condo is the Young Creatives Manager for First Story, a creative writing charity that empowers young writers with the skills and confidence to tell their own stories. Rose is also a writer and performance poet. She has published 2 poetry collections with Manchester's Flapjack Press, and she has toured her poetry across the UK and internationally. And now I'm going to give the mic to my co-host, Carolia, over to you.
Thank you so much, Star, for the wonderful introductions. So between all of you, we can hear that there's already such a wide range of occupations, and not only that, but every one of you juggle multiple things. You're not just this, you're also that and the other thing. So we'll start from the beginning. I'll ask this question to Professor Mojisola and Suresh. Could you tell us about what you think has most helped you start out in your respective careers and advance in it? Was there a mentor? Was it your education, etc.?
I can jump in as my name is mentioned first, but feel free to drop the prof. I just because it just makes me giggle when anybody calls me that. I think, and maybe that speaks to some of how I kind of became a writer, because it's kind of funny to end up being a professor when I became a writer because I got booted off a degree program. I was doing a degree in English, and I thought it was far too much reading. And I was doing German as well, and they discovered after about a year that I couldn't really speak German, so I got kicked off that degree program at Goldsmiths, and the drama department was the only one that would take me. And that's how I got into theatre, and how I got more formally into writing eventually. So it's very funny. I end up being an academic, but I suppose perhaps that speaks to something that I'd like to say is um, that one can lean into what um, one seemingly fails at. That this idea of being good, being a good writer, or being a failed writer, and all this kind of judgment out there. I would encourage people to be very playful with all of that, and to not judge themselves too harshly. And I think, and to be audacious. So I think that playfulness and audacity, and I'm going to do it anyway, and I don't really care, and I'm not, and I don't fit, and that's a good thing, is probably what's driven me and still drives me.
Mojisola, listening to you, I feel like I'm in good company on this question. So, 2 things I guess I would pick up on. So, one is I failed my A levels at school, and when I did get to university, I was asked to leave in my second year, which was really me retaking my first year. So, I'm perhaps not a poster child for higher education, but there's lots of benefits to it. But failure, I think, allowed me to switch into a kind of exploratory mode. I don't think I would have described it that way at the time, but I would now. And then I had 2 mentors. One was a publisher and one was a literary agent. And the literary agent said to me at one point, why don't you think about becoming an agent? I'll hold a brolly over your head, and any questions you can come and ask me, which was an incredibly generous offer. And in the spirit of ignorance, which I think for many things, barring maybe flying an aeroplane or being a brain surgeon, is a really good place to start, because you can't talk yourself out of doing things. And I kind of just went from there.
Brilliant. And this is more of a wider question as well that I have for you. If you could kind of think about maybe your younger self. Why did you launch your career in literature? And did you always know you wanted to have a career in literature, or was it more of a slow build? Nick, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, hi, and thank you for being involved in this. It was, I did not always want to do this. I was a lawyer and I did go to, did do the higher education thing and went to university, and then I became a lawyer in a very big law firm. But there is a moment when I realized that that's not what I wanted to do forever, and so then I proactively sought out the opportunity to carve a career in this field. And the thing is, for me, when you ask somebody what they do and what they're involved with, I used to be asked that, and the answer was, well, I'm an emerging markets derivatives lawyer. And you get the exact opposite look back as you get when you say, I own and run an independent bookshop. And although I hadn't yet started running an independent bookshop, I realized that I wanted to do something that was based around something I love. I just wanted something I truly loved and would like to talk about people when they ask me what I'm doing, that I wouldn't make my own heart sink, and that wouldn't then make their eyes droop or roll. So that's kind of, it was very idealistic from our side. It's not something I initially set out to do, but then at a certain point in my career, when I realized I didn't want to do my old career forever, it was then very purposeful to do something that was around what I loved, and what I loved was books.
I love that. I think that's why we're all here. And when we think about a career in literature, we think about books, we think about writing and all the wonderful things that come with those two. But what does a career in literature really look like on a day-to-day basis? How much of your time do you actually spend writing or reading? I was wondering if Rose, you could take the question.
Sure, I'd be happy to. It's such a joy to be here in this panel. So my time is kind of split between working part-time for First Story as the Young Creatives Manager, and then working part-time as a freelance poet and workshop facilitator. And I would love to say that that means one day a week I sit and write, and that is just not always the case. So with my First Story days, it's very much literary linked. But today I was on an interview panel for a publishing internship that we're running, and was sending out some letters of agreement for writers that we're going to be working with. And with my freelance time, I've just launched a podcast. So I've been editing that, and I've been sending out invoices for freelance work. So it can be a little bit of a challenge to really dedicate and ring fence that time for reading and writing. I do try to put at least once a week a kind of couple of hours aside for it. But in the kind of heavy productivity atmosphere we have in today's world, it can feel like a lot of pressure to sit down and at the end of 2 hours have something written. So I try to keep that time aside, even if it's just staring out a window for a little while or going for a walk, because for me, that's still definitely part of the writing process. I also try once or twice a year to take myself on a self-led retreat. So I went to Fox Hill Retreat Center in Cheshire the other week, with the sole purpose of just bringing a bunch of post-it notes and pens and paper and just writing. I'm working on a new show, but it was just to see what ideas would land and really carve out the space for that. So there is time for writing, but it takes a lot of intention to put that time in the schedule.
Yeah, and Rose, if I could also ask you another question, being in the creative, like in the literary industry, I think we're all familiar with how insular it can be, and oftentimes success depends on who you know. So based on your experience and observations as a writer yourself, supporting emerging writers. How would you say people have flourished if they did not have access to such resources, whether it's connections or otherwise?
Yeah, it's a big question, and that's certainly part of the reason that First Story came to exist, where it was offering opportunities for young people who might not have ready-made opportunities for creative work within their families, within their communities. And so with First Story, I think it's having writers go into schools and working with them to really spark those ideas that writing and having something published is available to them. Because I think if you don't know it's available to you, it's hard to know to aspire to that. And so planting that seed from a young age for young people to go, oh, okay, this is available to me, and I'm working with a professional writer, so I can see how that might be possible. Certainly in a freelance capacity as well, it's community. It really is about community. So because I work a lot in performance poetry, I go to open mic nights, and there's such a lovely democracy to that, where people can get up and no matter their experience, no matter their connections, they can get up and share something on a microphone. And people do it for a variety of reasons, either to test their own confidence or to share their work or to record a video that they can share online. But it's all available to everybody who comes. And what's lovely about a lot of poetry events is then there's that discussion and camaraderie that puts a really nice positive spin on the concept of networking, which is not always a positive experience for people. And it means that through that in-person camaraderie and sharing, you can start to build those connections and start to build that community. And fortunately, because of the way things are digitally, that also can happen in a digital space as well to really broaden that sense of community.
Yeah, that's a very important point. I think making, friends, even people who are trying to make it in the field, it can be very helpful. And speaking of community, in a setting like a writer looking for an agent or Suresh, I think this would be very useful to get your insight. How open are professionals in your field, literary agents or otherwise, to helping entry-level professionals break into the field, or at the very least, connecting them to other people?
Do you mean in terms of writers or people who want to work in literature more generally?
I would say both, really, because yeah.
So I guess in terms of writers, the kind of trad response would be that a writer would go to the Artist and Writer's Handbook or maybe one of the kind of online sites. But if I think about how I got to work with most of the writers I represented, it was because they were doing really interesting work, and I got to kind of see them either at an open mic event or at a play that was staged, or that they had written something that was for a blog or something like that. And so maybe I think my belief is that some of the most interesting work sits at the kind of edges of the kind of literature ecosystem. And that was how I approached finding authors, and maybe those authors, I'd say that's how they ended up meeting together, us meeting. I think more generally, if you want to work in, I guess like in literature, and I'm not quite sure how we define what that means. I think people sort of form their own ecosystems and form their own networks. One of the things I'm struck by on this panel is that I think, Sarah, and with your exception, and maybe for you, Cara, you're in London, but the rest of us aren't in London. And in the UK, in an industry that has typically been very London-centric, there's something to be said for making where you are your own capital.
Thank you, Suresh. It's very true, and that's actually a very good reminder to make. Now, Mojisola, I have a question for you. You have a background in theatre. I have two questions for you. I'm hugely interested in the theatre of the oppressed or teatro de oprimido practice that you do. How did you find it? Is my first question, and the second one is more broad, I would say. how do writers find into theatre if they don't necessarily come from traditional drama school backgrounds? If you could expand into those 2 points. Thank you.
Sure, thank you for the question. Yeah, I got into Theatre of the Oppressed, and I think maybe this also connects with what I was saying earlier about a kind of a kind of playfulness, and following one's own pleasure and being quite intuitive. I got into Theatre of the Oppressed because I was so unhappy on the degree program that I did end up on, the drama degree, and I found it very classist and sexist and worst of all irrelevant to what was going on outside the door in New Cross in southeast London. It was, yeah, Goldsmiths back in the late 80s, early 90s, and I just thought this isn't working for me. This doesn't say anything to me, and I want to go off and write a play about oppression. And I was that broad. I just felt like I feel oppressed by all this, and I hadn't heard of Augusta Boal and Theatre of the Oppressed. And but there was an opportunity for an Erasmus scheme, a possibility to go to Dublin for 3 months, and I thought, I'll go to Ireland because the Irish know about oppression. I was just that kind of blunt about it, and I thought I got to Ireland and I thought I have no idea how to write a play, so I'll go to the library, big up libraries, and I found this book, Theatre of the Oppressed, and I thought, oh, that'll help me. That'll do it. And it just blew my mind. The possibility that people could make theatre from their own lives and tell stories that were relevant to them, and even use theatre as a way of bringing about political change and personal change in one's life. And then I got really lucky because 2 weeks after I read that book, the innovator of Theatre of the Oppressed, Augusta Boal, came to Dublin and ran the first Theatre of the Oppressed training course in Dublin. And then he went to London, and then I went back to London and trained some more with him. So that's how I got into Theatre of the Oppressed, to answer your first question, Sarah, and thank you for that, because I still smile when I think about that. The other thing about sort of getting into theatre and getting into writing for theatre, when you haven't done a degree, or when you've been as resistant to your degree as I was, and you haven't come from that kind of background. I hadn't seen much theatre at all. I'd been to a panto, and when I was a kid, and I'd been dragged along to another play because a famous actor was in it, and my friend fancied him, so we went along to see it. So I really didn't know anything about theatre, but I felt like I knew a bit about being oppressed. But so yeah, I really relate to that question of how you get into theatre when you're not from that kind of background. I think youth theatres are great places, to go to, especially if obviously if you're under 25. Community theatre groups, there are lots of them about, and they don't necessarily have to be kind of conventional amateur dramatics, but kind of theatre groups, but for adults. The one in Coventry, Belgrade, comes to mind. Joining writers groups, of course, and I suppose that speaks for lots of different forms of writing. Also, just feeling that you can kind of do it yourself. Seeing plays, following your own intuition, having a go. I started making theatre and I really didn't know what I was doing. But I just read a lot, talked to people, jumped into workshops whenever I could. So I think there's lots and lots of different ways of getting into theatre that don't necessarily mean you have to come from a very conventional kind of theatre culture in your background. But here I am. I am from Queen Mary, University of London, and so I think degrees have improved in theatre. So I think that's a brilliant way of getting into it as well.
That's beautiful, thank you. And all about what you said about pleasure, I think is so important, especially right now in these times. I can't be the only one who has a dream of opening a bookshop. I feel like so many of us had that dream, right? So, Nick, what does it actually take to open up a bookshop, especially in these times of digital age? Or you are an owner of a publishing house, and how do you make one to survive and thrive in this time and age?
Yeah, I mean, our opening story is based entirely on blind faith and a total of 3 month retail experience working as a delicatessen kind of helper at Morrison's supermarket. So we knew nothing. So the first thing actually goes back to a question that was asked earlier about how open this industry is to people. If you want advice, if you want a way in and what have you, it may not be easy to get a way in, but how open are people who are in it to talking? This is the most collaborative industry, I think, that is out there, the book industry that all of these careers feed into. What we did once we'd made our decision, I went around the north of England visiting bookshops and talking to bookshop owners, and they all gave me so much time, and they all had very different bookshops. And then I started speaking to suppliers, to publishers, to all kinds of people, and everyone was open to the idea that you were trying to get into the industry. So the listening part was huge, and I think that still goes through now. The last person I hired to join our bookshop had just come to a kind of a meeting of very local publishing people here that was a nascent little group, and she just sort of rocked up, and I ended up hiring her because she had a lot of initiative, and she was chatting about how to get a way in. So I just, as a side thing, I think it's a very open industry. So that's how we did it. There's a million practicalities that could fill several hours from, how do you do anything? But essentially, you find a location, you work really hard on a business plan, and you build it from scratch. And the things I always tell people when I spend a lot of time talking to people who are thinking of opening bookshops now, to sort of pay that advice that we got forward. The key things for me are you have to have an identity for your bookshop, and you have to know exactly what it's trying to achieve. But it might be mission led, might not. The mission might be to be to be doing like ours was, I guess, at the beginning, to be something that's the heart of the community and that is profitable, so that it can sustain your job and other people's jobs and spread joy on an ongoing basis. That's fine if that's your mission. Equally, you may have something much broader than that. We talk to people all the time who are doing it for different reasons, but whatever it is, you need to nail your flag to the mast with that mission and stick to it throughout everything you do. You need to provide the very best customer service, and you need to absolutely always make it about dialogue about books. That's our belief. We like to think of Mr. B's as being, it's not a temple for books. It's absolutely not. It's a playground for books. It's where books can be talked about and engaged with, to try and excite people. And in 2026, that's more important than ever, to try and for kids to come in and see how overexcited a bunch of adults are about books is the most rewarding and the most important thing that we do day to day. So, I mean, I think those are some of the key things. You asked about the publishing really briefly. That is a baby sister business, and that's born out of an arrogance after 9 years of the bookshop having survived and we're still growing. Sometimes we want to sell books and recommend books, and then they fall out of print. So we thought, well, let's just buy the rights and publish them. And so we learned that from scratch because we learned other things from scratch. And again, by then we had friends who were publishers, and they let us spend a couple of days looking at how you go about typesetting and all of that kind of thing. So it kind of, again, it was very organic, but it's a very baby sister business. We publish we're an occasional publisher, I would say. I don't know whether I've answered all the strands to your question, but if I've missed something, let me know.
Thank you, Nick. And if you have a question, I strongly encourage you to leave it in the chat box that says Q&A at the bottom of the screen. We'll be diving into the questions in about 11 minutes time. Before I hand it over to my co-host, a quick question to Rose. You empower young writers to share their stories. Can you just share us a couple of insights about personal storytelling and why that is so important?
Yes, absolutely. It's such a great question. And I think so many of us involved in literary circles know that story is just fundamental to who we are in connection. It's something that we as humans have been doing since became humans. And so it's also the way that we really relate to others in the world around us. So what we see with First Story is as young people begin to write, some of them who take part in our residencies haven't written much before. Uh, they kind of find their voice in what they're writing. They start to build some confidence, and then in sharing that, either in their sessions with their writer in residence, or then as they get to be published in their group's anthology, it takes it that step further in putting it out to the world. And then it's read, and then those who read it can relate to it. So it has this incredible ripple effect from starting from within and finding the confidence to come from their mind onto their page, possibly out through their voice, and then into the ears of those who hear it. And so that impact of story then is such an important breeding ground for empathy, for compassion, for connection, for community, as I said before. And it all starts from that seed of someone having the language, the courage, the guidance, the support to bring their story to life.
Beautiful. Thank you. Over to you, Carolia.
Thank you. Yeah. For Mojisola as an artist, but also as an academic and Rose in guiding young creatives, could you tell me about what you found to be most challenging about the industry and what was your way of approaching it and facing it?
Yeah, I think the most challenging thing for me about the theatre industry, if we call it that, um, over the years has been the closed doors. Um, and the doors that are closed and bolted by sexism, racism, ableism, everyism out there. Um, and that's still very much a reality. Um, uh, for example, one of my place stars, which I can now enjoy the fact that, it's an award-winning play, and that's not to boast, but it's just to remind people that you just keep going with what it is that you really want to do. But Stars is an award-winning play, but a leading sort of theatre venue director, whose name I won't mention. The play is about an old woman who goes into space in search of her own orgasm, and it's a wonderful play, and it's not because of me, it's because of the story that came through me and through the artist that I work with. So anyway, but yeah, for example, I was told most people, I just rejection and rejection and rejection, and one person had the audacity to write to me and ask why would an old woman want to have an orgasm. And that was a leading venue director, male. Um, so um, so that's really difficult, and I made a puppet when I got that email. I was so angry. I got some cardboard boxes and made my rage. So maybe that says something about always finding a creative way through your sense of rejection and rage and loneliness and frustration. Making some artistic response to it. But yeah, those closed doors are really, really hard. But I would really encourage people who coming from theatre or any aspect of literature um, to bang on the doors, push the doors, but at the same time do kind of what Nick has been talking to us about, and just kind of make your own frame. The first play I directed was in my friend's bedroom. Between us, we were a bunch of young artists, and we would just chose, who's got the biggest bedroom, and we chose one person, and then we invited people to come and see the show in that bedroom, and and then we launched a theatre company from that. And I think in this age, a digital age, where people are constantly looking for answers on their phone and constantly looking for answers and ways through on their screen and the rest of it, sometimes we lose touch with what does it take, especially with theatre. Theatre's the art of human relationships in space. It's the art of telling stories, but mostly in a live space. So you're never going to get there on your phone. It's just not going to happen. So whether it be in your bedroom or under a tree, finding your way to write, think, create, play, and knock on those doors. But if they don't open, make your own frame.
Yeah, I think definitely building on that, that's really inspiring. And I know that one hurdle that was really present for me was imposter syndrome. And I remember a very specific moment when I was just starting to kind of dip a toe into poetry. And I'd had a lot of theater background from studying in Canada, where I'm from. And I had gone to a scratch night, which, for those who might not be familiar with the term, is where you go and you test an idea out. It doesn't have to be polished or anything. And I was starting my first poetry performance show, did a scratch night, had a great response from the audience, had a lovely response from the host. And that night went home and told myself, this isn't for me. I shouldn't pursue this. And it was just by fortune that I kind of caught that thought. And I thought, no one's telling me that except me. And if I believe this, then I'm the one stopping myself going further down this path. And I think imposter syndrome really gets in the way at many stages of people's creative pursuits. But I think poetry sometimes has a sense of there's a real depth of vulnerability that's shared in a short amount of words or a short amount of language. And people can think, no one cares. Who wants to know about me? Why does this matter? And it always matters. It always matters to have those words shared. So, yeah, I think continuing to talk about imposter syndrome is really important, because even now, having several years working in this field, it's still there. It still rears its head. It's just acknowledging it within yourself, chatting about it with fellow creatives, and being reminded that what you are doing and saying and creating matters and is needed in the world.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, that's really wonderful advice. I think we have a few more minutes left. Do you think we should do one more question, Sarah? Yeah. Okay. So I think being in the arts and also humanities, I think we're always coming up against these like obstacles. And so kind of in the same vein, in light of, current developments in technology and politics, do you think, Suresh and Nick, too, if you have any insight, what changes to the field should people looking to have a career in literature be most aware of? As a literary agent, for example, maybe certain manuscripts and things like that.
I think one of the things I had to take from listening to everyone on this panel that's applicable to this question is how everyone has done their own thing. And I would kind of thread that through thinking about what people might want to do with regards to kind of the challenges there might be around tech or around politics. And just that there is so much opportunity that I feel like the constraints are often self-imposed. We impose them ourselves as individuals, within the confines of our own skull, and say, I can't do this, I can only do that. Or we take a definition of, in this case, maybe what constitutes literature, and think, oh, I have to fit into this kind of like square shape or in a particular way. And I think about, maybe this is my definition, I think more about story. And there are so many ways to work with story, as I think this panel have clearly shown. And so I guess my guidance would be not to let either your kind of inner voice limit you, or to let the voices of people who have a lot of experience, but then probably have a lot of expertise bias, tell you what can and what can't be done, because they're often looking back at what was done yesterday and they have no idea what's going to happen tomorrow. I sometimes work with students at the University of Exeter, and one of the things that I have suggested to them is that their superpower is the fact that in a room, they're often the people with the least amount of experience. And so they have no expertise bias. And everyone else who's got more experience will be like, well, we tried this yesterday, or we think we'll do this tomorrow based on what we did yesterday. And all of the really interesting people I've gotten to work with have done interesting work, often because they were either oblivious to what happened yesterday or they just didn't pay any attention to it.
Yeah, I would just add a few words, Suresh, not so much on the tech side, but it kind of relates to all challenges. And I talk a lot. I was just talking yesterday with, to an American bookselling colleague about all the challenges that they're they're facing at the moment, and there are those challenges pile up, and there's a lot of them which you can't avoid, and they're critical day in day out, and they're enormous, but you're not, as an individual, going to be able to solve those on any day-to-day basis. You should still engage with them. You should still push back at them. You should still do whatever you want to do with them. So then it's also really important to have to have in mind the challenges that excite you and that are in your control and that are the ones. And I think that's almost more important at the moment, where there are so many of these vast ones. I would count AI as one, right, in the creative industries, although I could also count global politics and prejudice and a million others. But particularly like something like AI, if you focus day to day on the thing that excites you and that you can control, and that's the reason why you're hoping that AI doesn't come to destroy the creative industries, whilst at the same time participating in any debate that helps push back the tide, then that's the better way to approach it. Because you've got to just everything that Suresh said, you've got to just focus all your energies on the reason why you're excited by what it is you want to do. And it's very difficult right now, but I think it's important.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. We are off to our next section in our panel conversation, which is the Q&A and audience questions. And thank you so much for the brilliant questions. I can see there is quite many of them. I'll try go through as many as we can. Let's start from the top. I would like to know how to contact publishers, literary agents. Is there advice on what to say and or what not to say? From Avril. Suresh, I think this is directed to you. And maybe Nick can also join in if you want to give any advice as a publisher.
So Avril, I think maybe the kind of most sensible answer would be to look in the Artist and Writer's Handbook, and that will have a list of publishers and it will have a list of agents. I'm going to guess that you're asking this question as a writer. And so the Writers and Artists Handbook will have, so I always get the titles mixed up, or the Artist and Writers Handbook will have a list of agents, and you can write to them. There's quite a lot of resource will tell you online what you need to say in a letter, and each agent will have their own requirement. I would say that from an agent's perspective, you're not making money unless you're selling works. So people will want to see new work. And so I would often go in with that mindset that you have something to offer in a kind of sort of even-tempered way.
Anything you wanted to add in?
I wouldn't particularly add anything, particularly as our publishing is not newly commissioned writing. It's only more or less only limited to reissues, except where we've been approached by a writer who's wanted to work with us specifically. But yeah, that is the advice that we give over the counter. We're often asked about it as well. That's the advice we give, and really paying attention to the publishers or the editors or the agents that seem most suited. Because that when you open that book, the book that Suresh is talking about in physical form is a daunting looking tome, but what it brilliantly does is split things out by exactly who is most plausibly going to be interested in whatever you're writing. So I think that really starting with the targeted approach is what I hear is the best way to go from my publisher pals.
Great. Next question, Rain Matthews. This is an open question to all of you. Is there an author or a book or play or poem that has stayed with you and helped you find your voice as a writer? I love this question. Over to you if anyone would like to unmute their mics. Otherwise, I'm going to sign it to you. And Mojisola, over to you then.
Oh my goodness. How long have you got? I'll just say the first thing that came to my mind in terms of theatre is a play called For Coloured Girls Who Have Considered Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough by Ntozake Shange. It was written in 1974, but still feels very contemporary. And when it's poet, it's called choreo poetry. It's kind of choreographed poetry. And when I first read that, I thought writing was possible because it didn't conform to any kind of poetry or playwriting or storytelling that I'd ever read before. And it's certainly a play that kind of completely broke the mold. And what I love about that, and I still come back to it, is that that novels are an invention, theatre is an invention. Poetry is invention, music is invention, and we can keep inventing. And it doesn't. I think sometimes writers get obsessed with form and the form that they're in, and that's for someone else. That's for publishers, booksellers, and theatre producers to be concerned about. But as a writer, fuck the form, just don't worry about it. Write what you like, as Steve Biko said, and write what's from your heart, and the form what you'll want to write, the form will tell you what it needs to be. And I think yeah, that's why For Colored Girls Shanghai is one of my favorite plays,
Thank
if it's a
you.
play at all.
And Rose, I saw that you unmuted your mic. Do you want to go next as well?
Yeah, sure. What Mojisola has just said has made me think of a second person I wanted to mention, which was Selena Godin, who is a poet, and she's written a collection called well, she's written a few collections, but one of them is Pessimism is for Lightweights, which is just such an amazing title. And in that, she's got a couple of really standout poems for me. One is Welcome to Hope. One is Courage is a Muscle, and it's just line after line after line that just really cuts through to like the core of like profound experience and what courage is needed to really thrive in the world. And then the initial one that I was going to mention, it's perhaps a little bit obvious, but sometimes obvious is really obvious for a reason. And that's Mary Oliver and her poem Wild Geese, which starts with the incredible line, "You do not have to be good." And it's such a permission giving poem about starting from where you are, acknowledging that there are hurdles and challenges that you face, but to keep moving through it. And I like the poem so much, I had the first line tattooed on my arm. So those would be two that stand out for me.
Excellent. And there are such great questions. I'm just going to go continue reading them out loud. How do the panelists keep up to date with literature events? Is there a way to keep their passion alive throughout their career despite making it their career? Shiraz, over to you. Okay, Nick,
Okay.
go ahead.
No, I just thought you seemed to be waiting for a volunteer. Sorry, Suresh. I'm going to answer the second part about a lot of people often ask whether if you have a life revolving around books, does that maybe tarnish your love of reading? And I guess that's because there must be lots of parts of the working world where that is the case, but it has never done that for me. It's absolutely never. And I'm glad because I chucked away a different career in order to do this and center it on something that I loved. Every the yeah, my love of discovering new writing, discovering old writing, just it's constant bombardment for me from every customer who walks in and tells us something. And if by now, after 20 years of doing it, someone mentions a book that I've never heard of, that's all the more exciting. Talking with colleagues about books, reading books, reviewing books, writing about books. It's 100%. I would urge anyone who's thinking of embarking, who's umming and ahhing about embarking on a career in the literary sphere, whatever that might look at, and is thinking, oh, but I don't want to kind of, kill my babies. I don't want to ruin something because of that. I don't think that can happen in this particular corner of the planet.
I think there's something about increasing the surface area of serendipity so that you can bump into interesting stories. And some of those stories might be, on page. Some of them might come out of the mouth of someone. Some of them might just come through audio or through conversation. So I just try to kind of read and go and see things widely. I spend most of my time now reading comic books, I have to say. But there's also something about going to events and being in a place. As I say this, I think one of my kind of like abiding felt memories is thinking about upstairs at Mr. B's when you have an event, Nick. So yeah, there are chairs and they're nice to sit on, but the nicest seat is this, I don't know what you call that window that's like something out of a Regency movie that has a recess. And I like sitting there looking out the window and then like listening to the event and thinking like, actually, there isn't probably anywhere I want to be other than here right now. And so I think what I'm arguing for is a connection between people and place and story.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Aisha has a question to Mojisola. I would like to ask whether championing oppressed voices in theatre has ever led to closed doors. I recently attended a talk where a filmmaker who was an activist for Palestine had opportunities from Netflix turned away from him and wondered whether you have had similar experiences. Would you like to take that one?
Thanks for the question. Yes, many experiences, particularly on Palestine. So much so that when my biog was read out earlier, the name of the play, one of the plays is 48 Minutes for Palestine. And the play doesn't actually have any words. The only words are the title. It's all in action. It's published, but everything's in action. And after several years of touring that play with Ashtar Theatre Company in Palestine, we had so much resistance, and one festival we were due to be programmed at a festival in Portland in the States, and at the last minute the festival booker said, "I'm just really sorry, we just can't program a play called 48 Minutes for Palestine." And I was like, it doesn't have any words in it. Like, what are you worried about? And then we're so sorry, just the title. I said, I'll change the title. And so I changed the title to Oranges and Stones. And that play's been touring the world for the last 16 years. I was just in India and it was just touring there. So perhaps that speaks to something as well, that, okay, the doors may close, but to continue to be playful and experimental and determined and audacious and and make your work happen. And forget about the money. If I was to think too much in terms of money, um, if I just wouldn't be sitting here. It just I find my ways to make money, and if money comes through theatre and publishing the books that my plays are in, fantastic. But that cannot be a driver. It just doesn't work, for me anyway. So yeah, so many closed doors, but remaining determined is super important, and also speaking out about those closed doors, speaking out about closed doors around Palestine, for example, and making work from it. Yeah, thanks for the question.
Thank you, Mojisola. Next, I'm combining a couple of different questions, and that there seems to be kind of like a similar thread in these questions. Carol in the chat asked that there doesn't seem to be a very clear route to a career in literature. Can a PhD or MA add anything? And we also have another kind of similar question about funding and PhDs. So maybe I'll just open that as an open question. Does it is it necessary to have a PhD or master's degree in literature in order to succeed? And any tips, perhaps, also for aspiring writers?
I don't mind jumping back in as you know as I am on payroll for a university, part time. Um, I think MA programs could be really a fantastic way of meeting other people, of sharing your work, of getting feedback, of being challenged and having experiments and being and being encouraged and forced really to write to deadlines and all of that. So yeah, definitely. My own MA was in physical theatre, but that kind of led me into writing. But they can be expensive and that can be really tough, right? I had to sue a theatre company for racial discrimination before I was able to raise the money to pay for my MA. And that's probably the only reason I got that MA and ended up doing a PhD. So I would also say don't let that don't let that be a deciding factor about whether you develop a kind of so-called career in literature. As Suresh and I both said, you kind of the idea of failing in education can actually be a great spur as well. So yeah, MAs, PhDs. I think a PhD in particular, you've got to really want one, and you've got to know why you want it. And ultimately, it's a qualification to teach, and most people don't think about it like that. But it's so if you want to work in higher education, then a PhD is great. But if you don't want to work in higher education, I wouldn't say a PhD is a great kind of necessary kind of thing to do. Um, yeah, I've talked enough. Too much.
Great. Would anyone else like to add on to what Mojisola just said?
I would chime in to say that I've been wrestling with the PhD question myself for quite some time. I do have an MA from the University of Leeds in theatre and development studies, so I went on a bit of a different pathway in poetry. And I just secured a spot at Lancaster University for a PhD and couldn't get the funding and tried a couple of times and was unsuccessful. And decided that for now, that energy that I was going to put towards the PhD, the research, the writing that I was going to do, I'm doing it kind of on an independent project instead. So it's not a kind of full stop to that creative pursuit. It's just rechanneling it. And so it isn't going to give me the teaching qualification that Mojisola was just talking about, but it's a refocusing of that creative energy, of that intellect, of that creative pursuit in a slightly different direction. It's not a no. Maybe one day I will go back and revisit the PhD possibilities, but it hasn't felt like a stopping to that pathway. It's just redirected it.
Great, thank you. There seems to be lots of questions around how to break into the industry, and of course, some of them we have already covered. But before we finish, I'd like to ask from all of you if you've got any practical tips, advice on how to really break into the industry.
I'll jump in with one if that's okay. We are just about to launch a webinar series with First Story, talking to different professionals working in fields where literary work is involved. So it's called How Did We Get Here? And it's on the First Story website. And they're free webinars that are going to be chaired by our Young Creatives Collective. And it's focusing on particular areas of the creative industries, but how writing and language and literary elements are incorporated in people's roles. So it's not a direct way to get a job, but it will offer some really valuable insights, I think, for people looking to pursue careers.
I'll just answer from a bookselling perspective for anyone who's interested in entering our side of the industry. The first thing to do is to talk to the good people at the Booksellers Association, and in particular, they run a course on how to set up and run a bookshop. It's a one-day course run by the brilliant Patrick Neal, who owns a fantastic independent bookshop in Gloucestershire. And a lot of people end up doing that even if they then don't go on to own a bookshop. Maybe they're going to try and get a job in a bookshop. Maybe they're going to try and get a job in a publisher and they want the book insights into how the book selling side of things work. You know, and I think the only other thing to really quickly add from my side is just how many we heard from everyone just there, and this question and the last one, how many different routes there are. It isn't like, my old gig as being a lawyer, there's one route. Here, there's a lot of different ways and a lot of different backgrounds. So all of these things can help you, but doing it your own way in a slightly different way can also possibly end up being the right thing. A lot of persistence needed.
Yeah, I maybe have something which is just draws from my own experience. So about 25 years ago, when I thought, oh, maybe there's something interesting about working in what I thought of as publishing at that point, and which now I would think about as the book industry, and not really knowing what I wanted to do. I phoned up a publisher at that time, like one of the big five publishers, and got through to their HR and said, like, oh, can I come and do work experience as it was for you? And the person I spoke to said, oh, send your CV, and we get hundreds of CVs each week, but you should send it in. And I thought, well, I'm not really quite sure that my CV is going to cut the mustard. And so I wrote a letter to a publisher whose books I thought, and I still think, are amazing. And it was a kind of fan note. And she phoned me up. I was working in a bookshop at the time, and said, look, why don't you come and have lunch with me, and we'll have a conversation. And ever since then, I'm like a strong believer. I still do it now, is I write to people for whatever reason, or send them a postcard or an email to say, I'm really interested in what you do. Can you take some time just to kind of speak to me? And like the kind of strike rate is pretty good, I would say. I think you'll be surprised. And also, people like to receive notes that say, actually, I think what you've done is interesting. I mean it genuinely, though.
I know we're over time, but I just really want to underline what Suresh has just said as well. Um, and also just the thing about email, like most most people don't really like them, if they're really honest. And the delete button is just so easy, and just go, oh, don't know who that's from. Delete, delete, delete. But I bet you if you get a letter in a really nice envelope, handwritten with your name spelt properly, and you're like, and probably kind of not a brown envelope, not like a eight, tax office kind of envelope, but something a bit more special. You're not going to throw it away. You won't throw it away. You're not just going to get that letter and just like, oh, I'm just going to throw that away. You'd be too curious. You'd be too curious. You're going to open it. You know, so if there's somebody that you really want to get in touch with and to get advice and support, um, that's why Nick is going to be in business. Bookshops are going to continue because we just love it. We just love the film, the paper, because they come from trees. You know, they're the lungs of the earth. Books are the lungs of the mind. The lungs of the mind. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like write to people, and whatever you do, when you get in touch with someone, don't ask to pick their brains. So many people ask, "Can I pick your brains?" And I'm like, do you know what that means to me as a writer? It's like, what is that image? It's so horrible. Don't pick anyone's brains. Read their work or look at what they do as a profession, get to know who they are, and then try and make those connections. But whatever you do, it's about keeping your own sense of purpose. Nobody else will make, I think this panel is just incredible and inspirational. And one thing that's really come out for me is that, nobody's going to make that happen for you. It's not going to be about the right conversation with Nick Bottomley that is going to like launch your career as a bookseller. It's not really about that. All of that is just support. But no, have a sense of purpose. What is your purpose? Figure out what is your purpose. Your purpose, Nick's purpose was not to be a lawyer. It's to sell books. It's to be to own a bookshop. So like knowing your purpose and doing it, you'll figure out the money, and you'll figure out how to market it and all of the rest of it. You'll figure all that out, or somebody will figure it out for you. But really having your sense of purpose in literature and going for it, and having pleasure with it most of all.
That is the perfect way to end it. Thank you for our fantastic, brilliant, extremely wise and talented panelists. Thank you, Carolia, for co-hosting the event. Thank you for the audience members for your very smart, wise, insightful questions as well. And thank you for spending the last hour with us. And the Royal Society of Literature will follow up with an email with more information on how to get in touch with the panelists and how to also find more opportunities with Royal Society of Literature. There are a couple of links in the chat, and it's been my absolute pleasure to be with you in the past hour, and I wish you a very nice evening, and hopefully we'll stay in touch. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.